News Morning Show. My name's Donnie Glover. I'll be your host. We're being joined by Neil Dubo. Good morning, Neil. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Donnie. I'm good. How are you?
Neil, I gotta ask you. Now, in full disclosure, what were you saying about Ahmad Arbery?
Yeah, so we were just talking about it off air before we came on about that trial down in Georgia, and my one of my first cousins lives in Atlanta. Her husband's a criminal defense attorney, and he is representing one of the two white defendants in that case. I don't want to overstate it. We're not close, and I mean, what it's not like they're people I interact with regularly, and I certainly have not had any conversations with either of them about the case. I have my own opinions independent of the fact that he's representing one of the defendants, but in the event that we were going to talk about it, I at least wanted to disclose that.
Okay. So Ahmad Arbery, he's going jogging. There's this notion. Good morning, Michael Randolph, old faithful from down in Tampa. Going jogging, goes to the neighborhood. Some people say he was about to break into some houses. Uh, the other opinion is he was just jogging. But then, he was three white guys addressed him, and before it was all said and done, he's dead. But anyway, this morning on Court TV, they're discussing the motions, and they're looking at the training, the police training that two of the three gentlemen had. And the state was saying it doesn't matter what kind of law enforcement training they had. At the end of the day, they killed this man. And, you know, the question of citizens' arrests is were they doing a citizen's arrest? Arresting somebody is one thing, running them over and killing them is another, shooting them is another. How do you think it'll play out?
I think that I think they're going to be found guilty. To me, the bigger question is what is it that they are going to be found guilty of? You know, and there's so many multiple parts to this whole situation. To me, the criminal component is significant, obviously, right? These guys decided to deputize themselves and to take law enforcement into their own hands rather than handing it off to the appropriate authorities. And presumably, one of the reasons they thought they could do that is because they had been elevated both in their own minds and by society to think that they had the power to do this. And as a result, a young black guy who's jogging in a neighborhood ends up dead, right? And there needs to be accountability for that. Now, is it first degree murder? Probably not. It's going to be very difficult for the state, I think, to establish that they set out with the deliberate intention to murder him. How do you prove that? My guess is the more plausible theory here is that they exceeded the scope of what it is they were allowed to do, and that things got out of hand, and that alone, if there's no premeditation, drops it to at a minimum second degree. So I don't see this as a first degree murder case. Again, I'm not super familiar with the Georgia criminal laws, but they're going to be found guilty of something. To me, there's a different component of this case that people aren't talking about as much, which really, in some ways, it's obviously not worse than Ahmaud Arbery being dead, but it's something we should be very concerned about, which is initially, before the video came out, there weren't going to be any charges filed in this case. I don't know if you remember that. And one of the reasons was there was somebody within the state, the prosecutor's office in Georgia, who was friendly with at least one of these gentlemen who was going to make this go away. And but for the fact that this video came out and that it became more of a public thing, there may never have been any accountability at all. And that is something that I think as Americans, we thought we had left behind in the 50s and 60s, as abhorrent as it was then. We probably feel as a society that's something that we don't have to deal with, that at a bare minimum, people at least should go to trial. And the fact that we came so close in this case to that not happening, to me, is in many ways as significant as the main story itself.
Have there been big cases in South Africa like this, where race is the factor?
Yeah, sure there were. More recently, you have a court system that certainly has led to more accountability. South Africa reshaped their court system after apartheid ended. But prior to that, you had many instances of white people committing crimes against black people and facing no accountability at all because the police protected them, the politicians protected them. There was just a complete lack of accountability, and I think that we've talked previously about the whole concept of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think one of the things that came out of that was the volume of crimes that were committed against black people, not just that led to their deaths, but in terms of confiscation of property without any type of due process. Just the sheer volume of criminal conduct committed against black people that other people had been unaware of was breathtaking, and that came out in large measure during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
We've just been joined by attorney Robert Fulton DeShiel. Attorney DeShiel, we were discussing some of the motions in the Ahmaud Arbery case down in Georgia, where the state was, the part that I saw was the state was questioning why expert witnesses, law enforcement experts, were being brought in to sort of justify or to explain the training that two of the three defendants had. And Neil was explaining too how initially there weren't going to be charges brought against the gentleman who killed Ahmaud Arbery. Any thoughts on the case?
Well, let me first say that I've never handled a police brutality case and know very little about it, except that my understanding is, based upon the most recent Supreme Court case, it's basically a local standard of care that's applied. In other words, so that if the defense can show that their conduct was consistent with their training, that could constitute a defense, not just to the criminal charges, but also ultimately and subsequently, and what I'm sure are going to be civil suits to follow. I have not been following the case. I've been, frankly, more concerned about the outcome of Tuesday's election around the country.
Okay, we're going to get to that, but
I know.
Mr. DeShiel, you were in the news yesterday.
I was.
You want to share with him why, Donnie?
Yeah.
I'm curious.
What did I do now?
The Board of Estimates meeting.
Oh God. I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to have to take about a 2-minute break. I got to go. My car's blocking someone, and I have to go move it. But Donnie,
you want to wait because I don't know that you can do this in 2 minutes.
All right, let me do that, and I'll be right back.
I don't want to rush you. Okay. Do you follow the Board of Estimates at all? It has to do with the contract.
Yeah, I know we had talked previously about the contracting issue. I'll be honest with you. I have no idea what happened at yesterday's Board of Estimates meeting.
Well, I'll let the attorney. I'm not a lawyer, nor do I claim to be a legal expert, but it boils down to a contract that was put out there. There was some opposition, and then the mayor pulled it back. And if I'm not mistaken, Mr. DeShiel represents the client who lost. The protester, if I'm not mistaken, was a black man, a black company. And more than that, for me, it just brings more attention to the Board of Estimates. Who doles out the contracts for the city? Who benefits? And it's always been my position in a majority black city, blacks should be getting business and not crumbs, not 1%, not 2%. I mean, if the city's goal is 27%, don't break these people off some business. I mean, it's not complicated. And a bigger issue for me is how we so often go out of state to find businesses to do what can be done here. Case in point, the Board of Elections. They get their, the voting documents, that you fill out, they're made out of state. And I'm just wondering, there's no one in the state of Maryland that can produce these? No one? I just believe in supporting local business. It's just common sense to me. If I were in South Africa, if I were in India, wherever, support local business. Business is the backbone of any economy. And support it right here. I don't want to go to DC, California.
How many years now have we talked about the deterioration of Baltimore City? And the fact that politicians aren't doing enough to support the city, and everybody always, not everybody, I don't mean to lump you in with this, but people generally talk about it in the context of, oh, well, we need to appropriate more money, or we need to invest in the city and put money into this, into that, and the other. And the part that gets ignored is if we just emphasized and prioritized business contracts to Black-owned businesses in the city, the difference that would make, right, in terms of employment numbers, in terms of economic revitalization, a rising tide lifts all boats. It would have an enormous effect, and it would be significantly more impactful than just throwing money at it. Let the people invest the money and let the people show you what they're capable of.
Neil, there was a time in this country where Blacks couldn't shop in white stores. Mm-hmm. Here in Baltimore, Black women had to go in the side door of downtown department stores, Hochul, Cones, Hex, I'm just throwing out names. They had to go in the side door, go in the back door. They couldn't try on shoes. They couldn't try on hats. Racism, segregation, Jim Crow kills business. Clearly, that wasn't America's best thinking. I don't want you to try this hat on. That's clearly not a business person. That's clearly not a hustler.
Right.
I mean, just racism is bad for business. If I'm in business, I want to make money from everybody. And so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
Neil.
also water is wet, right? I mean, yeah, absolutely. Of course it's bad for business, and it makes no sense. And there's certain things that I just flat out don't understand, and this lack of understanding of investing in infrastructure, and by infrastructure I mean people, and investing money and giving contracts to Black-owned businesses to allow them to revitalize Baltimore from the ground up, to me, make like the fact that people don't see that makes no sense.
I'm not a lawyer, but I am a bit of a historian. I want to share this with you, and then we'll get to Mr. DeShield and the Board of Estimates yesterday. Did you know that Mayor J. Barry Mahul, and you're going back to the early 1900s, he's known as the father of segregation. It was during his tenure and afterwards that these housing policies came down the pipeline, and they were ultimately replicated around the country, making Baltimore a national leader in this whole segregation effort. J. Barry Mahul. But for every person like a J. Barry Mahul, there's a nemesis. And there's a street that goes through West Baltimore called McMecken Street. Mm-hmm. Mr. DeShield would know the story better than me, but there was a lawyer named George McMecken, and he had a cousin named Ashby Hawkins. They both were lawyers, and they were on J. Barry Mahul like white on rice, no pun intended. But they were civil rights fighters, and he didn't have an easy go. I mean, his policies were ultimately replicated, but it wasn't without a fight. Welcome back, Mr. DeShield.
Okay, let's go. You want to know what happened at the Board of Estimates yesterday?
Yes, sir. What happened?
I'm still waiting for official notice.
The writing's on the wall, I thought.
Here's what went on. The city advertised for a contract to among other things, purchase and plant 1,500 trees. And these 1,500 trees had to be planted within a 30-day period. And there were two bidders. one called Baltimore Tree Trust, and the other called Lorenz, which is my client. After consideration of the bids, the Bureau of Purchases, or the Bureau of Procurement, I think they're now called, sent an email to my client a week ago saying we're going to recommend you for award, and that recommendation is going to be on the agenda for the board's meeting yesterday. That was the last notice we got from the city. Then on TV, we see Mr. Thoreau, along with, I guess, some officials of Baltimore Tree Trust, talking about how bad the process was, and that Lorenz was, quote, connected some way to politically, and as a result of the political connections, had gotten all these city contracts, and it was a travesty. The city procurement system was broken, and so forth. Now, what Baltimore Tree Trust did not do was follow the rules. They didn't file a protest against the record. They had until noon on Tuesday to file a protest. Instead of filing a protest, they held a press conference. I've been around long enough to be particularly cynical of these things. Let me tell you what I suspect happened. Baltimore Tree Trust found out that they couldn't even buy the trees, let alone plant them and do the other work for the amount of their bid. So they didn't want to be awarded the contract. The objective was to get the contract thrown out and rebid, which is, of course, what the mayor decided to do. How do I know this? Because I had to make calls to find out. Again, we received no official notice. But the fact that happened in that way is what is really the evidence of how broken the city's procurement system really is. It's all politically activated. Lorenz is not politically connected. I'm the closest thing to a political connection that Lorenz has. And I represented one of the mayor's opponents, Sheila, as you well know. Every contract that Lorenz has with the city has been as a result of competitive bidding. There's never been an emergency award. There's never been any sole source award. They've always won because they were the best at what they do, and they offered the best price at the time. You would have thought that at least meant that if the city was going to change its position on the recommendation for award, that there would have been some official notice, that somebody would have picked up. First of all, you would have thought that somebody would have picked up the phone and said, hey, there's a protest over this. Do you have a response? That didn't happen. Then you would think if once they at least changed their mind, and I'm talking about the mayor, they've changed their mind, somebody would pick up the phone and say, hey, your matter is not going to be included on the agenda today. The mayor has withdrawn it. That didn't happen. I know about it only because I know who to call to find out what did happen. Now, so what happened? So it was wrong. It was wrong. I didn't know I was on the news about it, but I do know that Lorenz has filed sent a letter to.
The story was on the news.
Yeah. Lorenz has filed a letter with both the Baltimore Brew and Fox News, asking them to respond because, as I said, the facts as stated in the media were 100% wrong, 100% wrong. And I would say if the city today said we're going to award the contract to Baltimore Tree Trust at their price, Baltimore Tree Trust would disappear. They don't want the contract at their price because they now know, and I don't know when they found out, but they now know they can't even buy the trees for the amount of their bid. That's what happened.
Does this mean that you and Jim Shea will square off?
I don't know. When the city decides to rebid the contract, we'll have to see the outcome of that rebid. Now, I frankly question how Baltimore Tree Trust could ever position itself to be able to perform because they've only got 3 trucks and 5 employees, and at least as of yesterday. And it's pretty hard to plant 1,500 trees that are caliper of 2 to 5 inches and weigh 200 to 300 pounds each. It's pretty hard to plant and provide the necessary care for that number of trees in 30 days with 3 trucks and 5 employees. But we don't know.
What should the mayor have done from your perspective?
the mayor should have left it in the hands of the professionals, of the agencies that had reviewed the bids and made the recommendation based upon their experience and based upon the bids as submitted. He should not have injected himself politically in the process.
Neil,
go ahead.
Neil, let me pose this to you. Fox, one of the things they said, and I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a businessman. And when I do business, I want to deliver a great product for a fair price. Fox said something and it troubled me. When they spoke about the bidding, they said at the end of the day, and this is what I derived from their statement, that they inferred that a business, if the city hires them to do a contract, they inferred that the business should save the city money. And I would argue that if I'm doing business with you, it's not my job to save you money, but it is my job not to waste money. Is there a difference?
I don't know why that would be any. I mean, there is a difference, yes. But number two, I think I don't know why that would be any different than a job done for a non-governmental entity client, right? Your job is to be efficient and do the best job you can, and that's ultimately what should result in you getting business or not getting business. You know, I want to pick up on something Robert said because it struck a chord with me, and I think he'll appreciate the analogy I'm about to make. He and I have both tried, Lord knows how many cases in our career, and I go in front of judges and juries, and I win and I lose, right? And there are times that I lose that I think maybe it should have gone the other way, but all I ask for is fairness when I walk into a courtroom. If I walk out and a judge or a jury has been fair and I came out on the wrong side, such is life. Right. But there's no worse feeling than going into a process where you think a judge has treated you unfairly or has given an advantage to the other side. You feel like you've been cheated. Right. And what that and the analogy I want to make to what Robert was saying is all he and his client want is a fair process. Right. That's all they're asking for is accountability and a fair process. You know, the outcome will be what it will be. And it sounds like, based on what he's describing, that the process was flawed and unfair, and without any explanation being provided. And that is the type of thing that leads to the erosion of trust and confidence in public institutions.
You're absolutely right. There's a complete lack of, you know, what's the fashion word these days? The transparency. There was a complete lack of transparency in that part of the process where the decision was made not to go forward with the recommended award to my client. There was no transparency relating to that issue at all. There was no discussion. They didn't even call us. As I said, to this day, we've not received notice as to the fact that the matter was even, you know, removed from the agenda yesterday. And that's wrong. And the city pays a terrible price for that uncertainty, because all procurement is rules. All procurement is rules and procedures. And it's all designed to create and maintain this thing called a level playing field. That's all it is. And without rules and procedures that require and observe and maintain due process, you've got no procurement. It's chaos. It's give the contract to whoever you want to have it. And that's a complete lack of public. That's not in the public interest. Now, the city already has, it's bad enough that the city doesn't pay its bills on time. At least not to my clients. I'll put it that way. Maybe there's lawyers out there that got construction clients and other businesses who don't have to wait, you know, 60 to 90 days or more to get paid without any interest on the unpaid balances, by the way. So the city's already got a bad reputation. The city also has a bad reputation because, to the extent that it has rules that relate to the relationship in contract administration under the so-called Green Book, it's 100% in the city's favor. Now, look, contractors and businesses are not stupid. If I'm going to do business with you, and if you set up your process and your procedures so that if we have a dispute, you win no matter what, then somehow you're going to pay for that risk, because it's all about allocation of risk. It's all about allocation of risk. So if you tell me I got to absorb 100% of the risk that you won't do what you say you're going to do, you're going to pay for that in my price. So I don't know how much over the years, how much additional money the city has paid over the years, and there's no way to calculate it because we don't even because it's an embedded increase in everybody's bid. It's an embedded increase, and how much any particular company decides to put in, how much of the risk they decide that they want to absorb rather than have the government pay for, nobody knows.
I want to shift gears a bit before we get into the political. One more question, just one last question, and it has to do, Neil, with the Baltimore State's attorney. Should the mayor be having a conversation with the state's attorney about low-level crime?
Mayor shouldn't be having conversations about the state's attorney about any crimes. I mean, you know, to me, it's that, you know, we all got bent out of shape, if you can make this analogy, when then President Trump was, you know, making public comments and having conversations with the attorney general about law enforcement functions when there's supposed to be independence between the two offices. I don't know why that same principle wouldn't extend. We can't just be against it when the other side does it and in favor of it when our side does it, right? That, you know, there should be independence between those two. The one is an executive position. The other one is, well, I guess they're both, but the other one is legal in the sense that the state's attorney should be making decisions about prosecutions.
Mr. DeShield?
And well, unfortunately, Donnie, the position of state's attorney in Baltimore City has been elevated to one of political leadership, which is wrong. I mean, state's attorney's job is to do one thing.
Prosecute
crime. Exactly, to decide who to prosecute and to undertake prosecution where they deem it warranted. But unfortunately, well, if you understand the history of that position in Baltimore City, you understand that it became a position of political leadership because Milton Allen, that was the first citywide position that was ever won by anybody black. And that was Milton Allen, as I recall.
Was it Joe Howard?
No, Joe Howard was on the Supreme Bench. Milton Allen won the position as state's attorney. And he was the first black to win that position. And as a result, it became a position, it was recognized as a position of political leadership in the city because it was a major achievement for the black community. But it didn't change the function of the job. The job is still to prosecute. So that now Mosby followed on and took it to a whole different level.
You're getting the echo there, Mr. DeShield.
I don't know why I didn't change anything, but anyway, Maryland took it to a whole different level, I think, and you know, sort of glamorized the position. I think it sort of began when she had an inauguration ball after she was elected.
She wasn't the first. Pat Jessamine had a ball.
Yeah. I
thought it was Freddie Gray.
Well, what started with the ball, but it also Freddie Gray was the. Let me say first, I think that her decision to prosecute the police officers who acted unlawfully was a correct decision. I think, however, at the time she made it, the timing of it was the problem. She didn't have her ducks in a row. She didn't have her evidence. She didn't have her evidence lined up. She didn't appreciate the level of opposition that she would encounter, even within her own camp. And that, unfortunately, I think resulted in either dismissals or acquittals or however it turned out. But I don't disagree that she, with her decision to prosecute, I think the timing was the problem.
Neil, it had a lasting effect on the police, though. The police, if you ask me, took a knee ever since, and the consent decree only exacerbated the issue.
Yeah, look, what Robert is saying is of course right. I mean, when you make yourself a political animal, right? That genie is out of the bottle, right? Yeah, it can't go back in. So now all of a sudden, when you announce the prosecutions of the Freddie Gray police officers, you can't then say, okay, I've been political until now, and now I want you to turn that light switch off and treat me solely as somebody who's enforcing the law. When you have made yourself political, every decision you make is going to be viewed through that lens.
Right.
And so unfortunately, I think that's what happened. It was perceived, rightly or wrongly, as being a politically calculated by decision. And I think that ultimately was one of the problems with the prosecution. And there was certainly legal merit to the decision to prosecute, and certainly a legal basis for it, but it was not viewed that way by many people because she had made herself political.
But there was a nuance that no one has talked much about. As a Baltimore City resident, I watched it and watched it closely. When the incident went down, the one that everybody watched on camera, the 3 officers on top of Freddie Gray were white guys. But as the trial unfolded, the first 3 people tried were black. And that just left me flabbergasted.
I think it reinforced the perception that there was a political component to it. It felt done by design.
Right, and there's no question that it was done by design. Those were what you saw was the product of decisions that were made. It wasn't incidental or accidental. I don't know whether we would know among us or whether anyone not involved will ever know what went through the minds of the people who made those decisions. But the fact that decisions were
and 3 white guys, 3 black guys. Oh, well, 3 blacks, including Sergeant Alicia White, 3 blacks, 3 whites. That's not what people saw on television, but that's what was presented to the general public.
Right. Well, you're right.
Okay. Did you know that Boston has the first Asian American mayor? Her name is Michelle Wu.
I did see that.
Not to be mistaken with Michelle Wee.
Right.
The golfer.
The golfer.
Yeah. But what's even more significant about that race, Donnie, is that she was both labeled as a so-called progressive and that she pursued that stance unapologetically during the course of the campaign. I mean, she didn't try to find a way to inch back toward the middle. She didn't apologize for her positions. Of course, now her mentor is Elizabeth Warren. Let's not lose sight of that. I mean, she's a prodigy of Senator Warren, but nevertheless, all the gurus, the pundits said that if she didn't move further to the center, i.e., the right, she had no chance of winning, and they were all wrong. She's not just
Neil. I don't know what you know about Boston, but when I think of Boston, 2 things come to mind. 1, I have never wanted to go there. Well, 3 things. 2, I do love the town. I do know the town movie is one of my favorite bank robbery movies ever. Talking about Charlestown. But number 3, I can never get out of my mind the picture of the black man being before he's stabbed with the American flag. That's my picture of Boston. It might be unfair, but I just can't get that erased out my brain. Kind of like George Floyd. What do you know about Boston and the fact that they've elected an Asian American woman? I mean, not a black, not a Latino, an Asian American. I didn't know their voting numbers. I mean, help me out. Help me understand the demographics.
Boston has a complicated history, but it's a very progressive city. And there's a micro and a macro point here. The micro point obviously is that somebody running to the center in a city like Boston doesn't make much sense because it's not reflective of the population in that area. But, I think one of the things that gets lost, and this goes to the bigger issue, because I think one of the things we're probably going to touch on is the Virginia election. And I don't mean to push the conversation that way too quickly, but I think sometimes what's forgotten, and I say this as somebody who is myself, I would consider myself to be a left of center progressive. I think we forget sometimes that we live in a federalist system. And while Boston is Boston, Boston is not Virginia. Boston is not West Virginia, which goes to Joe Manchin and some of the things that are going on. And that, this notion that there's this one size fits all approach that Democrats should take in terms of how they run for office. So if you just run to the center, you'll be fine everywhere, or you need to run to the left and you'll be fine everywhere, ignores the reality that what works in New York City or AOC's district or Boston, Massachusetts isn't going to play in Charleston, West Virginia, in a state that Trump won by 30 plus points. And so to me, the more fundamental question is, as Democrats, do we want to just be labeled as progressive or do we want to win elections?
Well, Neil, what is progressive? And see, this is one of my challenges with living in
Sure.
America. I don't understand progressive, liberal, Republican, Democrat. Doug Gansler said on the show, Republicans are the very rich. Well, 70 million, the people that voted for Trump are not all rich.
Right.
Yeah, look, these are labels, right? I mean, yeah, I
What is
think
a progressive?
a progressive, I think, is somebody who identifies with what at this point would probably be perceived to be the non, slightly more left of center of the Democratic Party, and then pushing further along that spectrum, the far left, if you want to use that phrase. But these are labels, right? I mean, what it might
All I
mean to
want to
one
know is,
person.
do they support my right to live and pursue happiness in America? That's all I want to know. And will they stand up when I'm not being treated fairly? That's all I want to know as a black man. Are you going to treat me right?
And the answer is it depends.
It does depend. It's exactly right.
It
Damn,
depends.
that ain't progressive.
It depends on how closely your issue touches upon the fundamental question of who does this country belong to.
Oh, that's going to be the name of your book.
Donnie, that's the issue. That's the issue in Virginia. That was the issue in New Jersey. That was the issue in Miami. The issue is, who does this country belong to? And you can't divide the people up by labels on that question. It's not a Democratic or a Republican issue. The problem the Democrats lost Virginia because a number of people who were registered as Democrats voted for the Republican. That's why they lost, and they voted Republican because of the Republican position answered the question to them in their minds in a more satisfactory way than the Democrats. The question being, who does this country belong to?
How did Terry McAuliffe blow this election, Neil?
Oh, easy. Two-part answer. He failed to recognize what I think were the issues that were really resonating with Virginia voters. And he failed to do something that Democrats should see as a huge red flag going into 2022. It was easy to win elections when you were running against Donald Trump. When he's not on the ballot, you have to be for something else. And Terry McAuliffe kept wanting to make an election about Donald Trump because it was easy to win that way, and Donald Trump wasn't a part of it. And Democrats have to understand that that's not a recipe for success in 2022 and 2024. Unless Trump runs again. If he's on the ballot, fine. If he's not, you have to tell people what you're in favor of.
Neil, he's a seasoned Democrat. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't he in charge of the Maryland Democratic Party at one time? Or
Terry McAuliffe? Terry McAuliffe is a previous governor in Virginia. Yeah. He was in Bill Clinton's administration. This is a very seasoned veteran political operative. There's no question about it. In fact,
how could he miss this?
I think their polling probably showed that. I think they assumed that Trump was going to insert himself into it, which he tried to do. And the Republican candidate, I think, somewhat smartly tried to sidestep that. He tried to have it both ways, and in the end was able to do it successfully, right? With a wink and a nod to Trump, but not doing it overtly. And he was able to look. If you look, Robert probably knows this better than I do. If you really break down the demographics in Virginia in terms of how this election played out, Terry McAuliffe got more votes this year in terms of raw numbers than Governor Northam got in 2017. So it's not that the base didn't come out. In fact, Democrats voted. Or at least they voted in bigger numbers than they did in 2017. What happened in this case was if you compare Terry McAuliffe's numbers to Joe Biden's in 2020, the single biggest flip was among two demographic groups: minorities, predominantly Hispanics, and women. The women who didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2020 because they couldn't stand him, Republican women, suburban Republican women who were like, I cannot vote for Donald Trump. I don't like Joe Biden, but he's okay with me because he's better than the alternative. When they saw somebody other than Donald Trump on the ballot, were happy to go back to the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And we have to you have to be honest about what happened if you're going to fix it in 2022 and 2024. There's no point lying about what happened.
And the other thing is, the main thing that the so-called Democrats have to recognize is that there's no rules anymore. There's no rules. They want to try to run campaigns and win elections based upon conventional wisdom, which has absolutely no application today. The Republican in Virginia created an issue over parental control of the schools.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
He created an issue over the so-called critical race theory, which nobody's even defined. But
Yeah,
essentially what the dog whistle is, that what that means is the school system cannot teach our white children that they owe anything to black children.
I say there was something else that nobody's really talking about: sex education.
Right.
Going back 2-3 years, they have modified the curriculum in Virginia schools that makes it, Neil, more to have our children, to have Virginian children discussing sexuality at a younger age. I don't need anybody talking to my child about sex before me.
The Republicans were able to use that. They basically made one bigger issue out of that and other things, which is we want to be in control of what it is our children are learning.
They shoved this sex education down the people of Virginia's throats.
Well, I think what the Democratic Party, especially in Virginia, but nationally, see, and this is the part where Democrats have to be careful. I think one of the big mistakes that has happened over the last 2 years, and I think you're going to see, I think Virginia is a sign of it. New Jersey is another one. I know Governor Murphy's going to hold his seat in New Jersey, but that to me, that's a solid blue state, and he came awfully close to losing that gubernatorial election, right? There should be big red flags flying all over in the Democratic Party today, because here's the problem. You have to deal with the political reality you have, not the one you wish you had. And the Democrats won the Senate, but they hold it 50-50. Joe Biden won a relatively close election against probably the worst candidate in American political history in Donald Trump. And, and Democrats came out of that, right, thinking they had this massive mandate that they could enact these huge spending bills and the Build Back Better Act and all of these things. And set aside for a second whether you think it's good policy or not. The fact that there's this perception among Democrats that they have this massive mandate in a country that is so evenly divided is always going to lead to backlash. We saw it after Obamacare was enacted. We've seen it every time a political party has taken power by a thread and then used it to enact significant change. There's always a pushback by voters.
Well, particularly when the voters are being egged on by the media, which is pursuing not the truth, but pursuing headlines.
Yeah, Donald Trump broke our media on both sides.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I wanted to know, when you gentlemen go to obtain your news, have you noticed that now everybody hates Fox? I get it. They ask a whole lot of questions. Have you noticed that the other stations don't ask any questions?
I have noticed that. I have noticed that, and because they're not interested in asking questions. They're interested in controlling thoughts and perceptions. They're interested. They are the 800-pound gorilla, if you will. They're the ones who are determining the outcome of elections in Virginia and New Jersey and other, because they're the ones who determine what the public hears. And since truth doesn't matter anymore, they can say anything they want. They can repeat anything they want. I said all along, why does the truth deserve the same airtime as a lie? Why do you in every article, in every publication, they keep talking about, well, Trump advances a conspiracy theory without evidence. Well, without evidence means it ain't true. If it ain't true, that means it's a lie. Why not say that? If you say it that way, people will understand it. But when you say without evidence, they see that as a political game. That's a technicality. Without evidence, that doesn't mean it's not true. It just means that's some technicality. That's a Democrat.
Just means we haven't proved it yet. Right.
That's a Democratic hoax.
Hey, Robert, we should try that the next time we go to court.
Yeah, yeah,
We'll see,
yeah,
see,
yeah.
see how that works out for us. I don't have the evidence yet, Your Honor, but
Right, right. It's coming.
it's coming.
Yeah.
Just you rule in my favor anyway, because I'll get it to you.
Yep. Yeah.
So does Tuesday's elections, do Tuesday's election results, what did they say to President Biden?
That he needs help. I mean, that's what it is. His the world as he believes it to be is not the world that he participated in when he was in the Senate. It's not even the world that he participated in when he was the vice president under Obama. It's a whole new world. And if you're not going to play by the rules of this game, which means no rules, then you're not going to be successful. See, and I don't know, this, Michelle Obama always used to say, we're going to take the high road. No. We can't abandon any road because every road is designed to lead to victory. So we got to put, if it's a road that shouldn't be traveled, we got to put up some roadblocks. If it's a road that needs to be traveled, we need to pave the highway. But we can't ignore any roads because there's no rules, at least in my opinion.
So I think I've been finding myself thinking a lot about Bill Clinton's initial election in 1992. And Bill Clinton won more significantly in 1992 than Joe Biden did in 2020. And you have to deal in reality. You cannot. Bill Clinton takes office in 92, and the first 2 years they tried the sweeping healthcare change. Remember Hillary Care, and they try to enact all the sweeping change, and they get destroyed. You have Newt Gingrich in 1994. You have the contract with America. Yeah. Republicans sweep into power, and Bill Clinton is faced with a massive existential crisis in 1994, going into 1995, because Republicans have just absolutely clobbered them. And he recalibrates. And Bill Clinton becomes more moderate, more centrist. What was that famous term they used? Triangulation, right? Whatever that means. and as a result of that, he marginalizes Newt Gingrich. He wins comfortably in 1996, right? And ends up reestablishing, I believe, control of the Senate. And his administration, for the large part, is deemed to be a success. And I think Joe Biden is facing a very similar situation right now. Right? He is probably going to get destroyed. His party is going to get destroyed in the midterms next year, is my guess. And this is an opportunity for him to say, look, why was I elected? Was I elected to be a transformational FDR? Or did I actually win election in 2020 mainly because I wasn't Donald Trump?
He won because he wasn't Donald Trump.
That's exactly right. And he has a very, very slim margin in the House and the Senate. This country didn't vote for transformational change in 2020. I wish they did. I wish they had. I support, from a policy point of view, a lot of what President Biden is proposing, but I have to live in reality. That is not what people voted for. As much as I like to think they did, they didn't. And if you try to enact something that people didn't vote for, they will push back. And they have. And we're seeing it.
So you see him as a one-term?
Again, let's see what happens. I mean, again, I go back to the book. Bill Clinton, to all the world in 1994, coming out of that midterm election, looked like he was dead to rights getting reelected in 96. And he won easily. And he's deemed to be a very successful two-term president because he was able to make the necessary adjustments, because he recognized the political reality and he realized what he had to do, and he was successful doing it. So I think the answer to your question, Donnie, is Joe Biden going to be a one-term president? I don't know the answer to that yet. I think the next 6 months are going to be hugely reflective. Pass the infrastructure bill. You have a win sitting for you waiting in Congress, and your own party is the reason it hasn't passed. That is deemed as incompetence.
Well, what's going on with Manchin, Mr. DeShiel? I mean,
well, first of all, I want to pick up on what Neil just said, that you have a win that you're precluded from achieving, and the problem is within your own party. That's the perception that the media would portray, but it's actually not true. They don't care. It doesn't matter what the Democrats come with. McConnell's going to stop it anyway. There is no bill that the Democrats can put in, that can take to the U.S. Senate, that isn't going to be subjected to filibuster.
To be clear, the infrastructure bill passed the Senate already with 69 votes.
Yeah, but it's now tied. To the
Build Back Better, which was a strategic mistake. They never should have tied it. You should have banked the win,
Well,
politically.
I don't agree because the process of compromise no longer exists. I think that the progressives, if you will, were absolutely right that if they hadn't tied it to that, we'd have an infrastructure bill and nothing else and nothing more. And of course, the reason why the infrastructure bill was in such good shape was, of course, because of Joe Manchin, who continues to oppose an end to the filibuster, as does Biden, for that matter. That if the Democrats are going to really take control of Congress, both sides of the aisle, then they're going to have to get rid of the filibuster. Otherwise, there's not a damn thing they could set up that's really going to change anything. I mean, the infrastructure bill was a bill designed to put money in the hands of the people who already have it.
My fear with that is the following. I don't say this to disagree with what you just said, but I go back to the Supreme Court filibuster. So when Harry Reid was head of the Senate, the filibuster applied to everything, and Republicans were filibustering every single Obama court nominee that was being nominated to a federal bench at every level of the judiciary. And so Harry Reid said, "This is ridiculous. This is enough. I'm getting rid of the filibuster for judicial nominees, not including Supreme Court appointments." And what happened when Mitch McConnell took the Senate? He took that Harry Reid principle and he expanded it. And he claimed that the precedent had been set. And so Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Barrett go on the bench because there is no filibuster for Supreme Court appointments because Mitch McConnell got rid of it, right? Had that been in place, those three people wouldn't have gone on the bench.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is I hear you on the filibuster argument, but I always ask myself the question, am I okay with taking a course of action, understanding that when the other side takes power, they have the same power? Because the second Mitch McConnell regains the Senate, and they likely will in 2022, if the filibuster is gone, Mitch McConnell's going to go nuts. He's going to have a field day because he always expands the rules because the rules don't apply to them.
And I'll take that because I take it as my personal responsibility to get rid of Mitch McConnell.
Okay.
All right. That's the voter personal responsibility. If we want to stop it, that's where the rubber meets the road.
Agreed.
And what's happened, Donnie, is that, our little not so well kept secret is that the ballot box can make a difference in 2021 and in 2022. Now that's secret. That's the genie that's out of the bottle. The Stacey Abrams program from Georgia, their goal is not to have that repeated anyplace else. So the goal of the people who want to continue voting without restriction, they want to pass the John Lewis bill. They want to reinforce or reestablish the provisions of the original Voting Rights Act. Those people there's only one thing they can do. They have to galvanize, they have to organize, and they have to vote. If you don't do that, listen, there are no options anymore. As they said in the last episode of The Godfather of Harlem, what Malcolm said, is either the ballot or the bullet. That's it. There's no middle ground.
There's a development. I'm not sure I've asked you about it. Last week, Congressman Anthony Brown announced that he would be running for Attorney General. It wasn't 5 minutes. Okay, it might have been 30 hours, 24 hours. His partner, Martin O'Malley, the wife of his partner, Katie O'Malley, announces her run for Attorney General. Now, how's that going to go?
Well, blood's thicker than water.
Is that a pimp slap or what?
Blood's thicker than water. It always has been.
No, that's more than blood. That's saying, Mr. Bob, that's like me. Come on, man.
Well, look, little Anthony had his shot, right? He got slapped by a guy that didn't even live in the state. Talk about Ben Jealous. So why should I feel bad about sticking it to him? I'm just saying.
Oh, damn. You called him Little Anthony?
Yeah, Little Anthony. I don't add the Imperials. I think too much of them.
Would he know who Anthony is?
Pardon?
Would he know who Little Anthony is?
He may not, but he can Google it.
There is no question that Katie O'Malley throwing her hat in that race is very deliberate and intentional. There is no love lost between the O'Malleys and the Browns.
What happened?
What
That's
happened?
all I want to know. What happened?
Anthony Brown's campaign for governor in 2014 happened.
Yeah.
He ran despite, not because of O'Malley, and he basically tried to run as somebody independent of and not on O'Malley's record, and he ends up losing to Hogan, and we can debate whether or not running closer to O'Malley would have changed the outcome. I suspect probably not, but I'm pretty sure Martin O'Malley took that personally.
But
O'Malley's name is not what it once was.
And O'Malley would probably tell you that's one of the reasons why. Now let's not forget his very successful run for president. That may have had some impact on his post gubernatorial career. But again, if you put yourself in Martin O'Malley's shoes, there's a grudge there.
Why? Come on, man. When you were mayor, you weren't mayor 5 minutes and you wanted to be governor. And while you were governor, you let everybody know you wanted to be president. The challenge is no one saw mastery of each station before progress to the next level. We just saw ambition. And look at Baltimore today. Sandtown lost a heap of money when he came in, money that was shifted elsewhere. We haven't seen development in 20 years. Is it Martin's fault? I won't say that. But I tell you what he did do. He locked up a hell of a lot of Baltimore.
Yeah, but who he was trying to emulate in a way. You talk about nobody seeks mastery. I mean, let's be honest about it.
Giuliani?
No, President Obama. Obama was an immense politician and I think a very successful president, but he'd been in the Senate, 2 years before he ran for president?
And he called Martin O'Malley Jack O'Malley one day. I remember that.
But so my point is, I think O'Malley would look at it and say, look, there's a history of somebody doing what I tried to do and being successful without mastering one particular position before pursuing the next one. The problem is for O'Malley, there's a titanic chasm between the political aptitude of Martin O'Malley and Barack Obama.
I think you're skipping a generation. I think Martin O'Malley picked up on Bill Clinton's mantra, which is send black folks to jail.
But he turned his back on the Clintons at the end of the day, though.
Well, when he didn't need them anymore.
Well, that's not loyalty. You help me. Oh, come on now.
What have you done for me lately? Come on, Donnie. You've been around. Look, Bill Clinton won a second term because he promised to send black folk to jail, and he did.
Yes, he did.
Martin O'Malley picked up on that with his principle of zero tolerance, which sent more black people to jail, which he did. All right.
And there's a price to pay for it.
Pardon?
And there's a price to pay for it.
Well, and look at, the Bill Clinton crime bill that ended up passing, which was part of the recalibration we were talking about earlier.
I'm sorry, I was wrong.
Joe Biden was a big supporter of that in the Senate.
Yeah.
Right? These things are all connected.
Any final thoughts, gentlemen?
The ballot or the bullet? Pick your pain.
My final thought, I'll just reiterate what I said earlier. Do we want to as Democrats, do we want to maintain the high moral ground, or do we want to win elections? It's all well and good going after Joe Manchin and telling him what he should do. Would you rather have a Republican sitting in that seat in a state that Trump won by 30 points? Or can we live with a moderate Democrat and just make sure we have more than 50 votes in the Senate so that Joe Manchin is marginalized rather than getting rid of that seat?
Or is there a difference between Joe Manchin and a Republican?
There is, in the sense that he's made. Here's the difference, Robert. Here's the difference. There may not be an ideological difference, but the difference right now is the difference between Mitch McConnell or Chuck Schumer as Senate Majority Leader. And that does matter.
We'll be back tonight, folks, at 7 p.m. for the Black Business Roundtable live from Oakland with Doug Blackshear and Dr. Ashley Coleman.
Gentlemen, pleasure.
Attorney
My pleasure.
Grabowski, we appreciate you much. Much love to you and your families. Be safe out
Thank you.
there.
You guys too. Be safe.
Good morning, world.
Same.